Chapter 4 Dead Signal. The crash was a chaotic blur of gray mist and screaming wind. One moment, Rilo was gripping the back of Lisa's air scooter. The next, the engine emitted a pathetic electronic choke and died. "Rilo, get ready to jump." Lisa's voice barely cut through the whistle of the falling craft. "If we get separated, meet at the cathedral." Rilo threw himself into the abyss. He hit the ground hard, tumbling through waist-high weeds and damp soil on the northern hills overlooking the town. The Silent Hill. Rilo pushed himself up, his head spinning and his ribs aching from the impact. He reached for the tactical tablet strapped to his forearm, the NixScan 5000. He tapped the glass. Nothing. The screen flickered with a sickly green static before fading to a dead, oily black. "Great. High-tech paperweight," Rilo muttered. He tried his comms piece. Static. Even his electric torch was dead. A small metallic buzz sounded near his ear. A pair of glowing red compound eyes whirred to life. Flap flap, his specialized mechanical fly, hovered upward. Its four translucent wings beat at a dizzying speed, stabilized by an internal gyroscope that didn't give a damn about the town's electromagnetic interference. "At least you're still kicking, buddy," Rilo breathed, wiping a layer of cold mud from his visor. "EMP shielding is worth every credit. Can you find the cathedral? Give me a heading." The mechanical fly spun in a tight circle, its sensors locking onto the largest structural mass in the valley. It zipped forward, hovering 10 feet ahead of Rilo like a glowing breadcrumb. The resident. As they descended into the residential district, the air grew heavy with the smell of wet soot and iron. Rilo stepped over a shattered bicycle, his boots splashing in a puddle of stagnant water. A figure stood under a flickering street lamp. It was a man wearing a tattered flannel shirt, standing perfectly still, staring at a picket fence. "Excuse me?" Rilo called out cautiously, his hand drifting toward his utility belt. The man's head snapped toward him with a sickening, audible crack. Rilo stifled a gasp. The villager had no face. The skin had been crudely, violently sliced away from the hairline down to the jaw, leaving a raw, glistening mass of exposed muscle and muscle fibers. Worse still, his eyes had been completely gouged out. Deep, empty sockets stared back, weeping thick, dark fluid down his ruined cheeks. The man's jaw unhinged, stretching the torn skin until it split further, exposing bloody muscle. He let out a wet, rattling hiss and sprinted at Rilo with terrifying jerky speed. Flap flap, interference pattern delta. Rilo shouted, stumbling backward. The mechanical fly zipped forward, meeting the faceless man mid-stride. It emitted a high-frequency sonic pulse, a physical wall of sound. The creature's head recoiled as if it had been punched, but it didn't stop. Blind and driven by pure feral instinct, it swung wildly, a jagged fingernail catching Rilo's jacket and tearing the fabric. "Now strobe." Flap Flap's red eyes shifted to a blinding, rhythmic white light. Even without eyes, the intense heat and sudden energy signature confused the creature's heightened senses. The villager shrieked, clutching at his hollow, bleeding sockets. Rilo didn't wait to see more. He bolted down the sidewalk, his heart hammering against his ribs. The gauntlet. The noise attracted an entire neighborhood of nightmares. From the porch of a sagging house, a woman in a floral dress vaulted over the railing. Her face, too, was a flayed, crimson mask of exposed flesh, her empty eyes weeping black slime. From an alleyway, 3 more emerged, one wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit, his arms ending in jagged, splintered bone, his faceless head swinging wildly as he caught Rilo's scent. They weren't a slow-moving horde. They were aggressive, solitary predators, and the scent of living blood had driven them into a frenzy. Flap flap, 12 o'clock. Discharge. Rilo screamed as the mechanic lunged from the shadows. The mechanical fly dived, its tiny legs latching onto the creature's raw, skinless neck. A blue arc of electricity hissed as Flap Flap dumped a high-voltage capacitor into the monster. The mechanic collapsed in a heap of twitching nerves, but another villager, a former teenager with a hollowed-out face, stepped right over the body, grabbing Rilo's ankle. Rilo went down, his palms scraping harshly against the concrete. "Get off me." He kicked out wildly, his heavy boots smashing into the teenager's exposed jawbone. The creature didn't care about the pain. It snapped its teeth, trying to find his flesh by sound alone. 6 o'clock. Keep them off my back, Rilo yelled, scrambling upward and forcing his legs to move. The woman in the floral dress was closing in, her fingers elongated into blackened talons. Flap Flap circled her flayed head like a persistent hornet, using its wings to create a localized vacuum that threw off her balance. Every time she swung at Rilo, the fly was there, buzzing into her bleeding sockets or emitting a sharp pop of compressed air to stagger her. Rilo was running on pure adrenaline. A faceless villager lunged from behind a parked car, colliding with his shoulder. Rilo spun, throwing a desperate, heavy elbow that connected with the creature's raw cheek, sending them both tumbling. He scrambled up, panting, his lungs burning from the soot-choked air. Ahead, through the choking fog, he finally saw it. I see it, Rilo gasped. The sanctuary. Rising above the mist was the cathedral. It was a massive, rotting Gothic beast of stone and stained glass. The bent cross at the top groaned in the wind like a dying animal. But the courtyard was crawling. 3 more faceless ghouls blockaded the stone steps, their head wounds weeping into the dirt as they paced like starved dogs. We have to break through. No choice. Rilo put his head down and charged. He tackled the first villager, a small man in a shredded coat, sending him crashing into the stone balustrade. The remaining 2 closed in instantly, their cold, clawed hands tearing at his jacket, ripping away pieces of his gear. A hand gripped his throat, pressing down with impossible, dead strength. Rilo choked, the world spinning as he stared into the horrific, hollow sockets of his attacker. Flap Flap. Full. Overload. The fly didn't hesitate. It jammed itself directly into the creature's open, wet mouth and let out a continuous, blinding electrical discharge. The smell of ozone and burning flesh filled the air. The creature exploded backward, clutching its smoking throat. The distraction gave Rilo just enough room. He tore himself away from the last villager's grasp, leaving a sleeve behind. He lunged for the massive oak doors of the cathedral, his body slamming heavily against the wood. He grabbed the iron handles, shoved the doors open with a primal yell, and stumbled into the darkness inside. Before the horde could follow, Rilo threw his entire weight back against the heavy wood, forcing the massive doors shut. He lifted the heavy iron bar and dropped it into the rusted brackets just as a dozen cold, heavy impacts thudded against the exterior. The wood groaned under the weight of the faceless monsters scratching and tearing at the outside, but the bar held. Rilo slumped against the door, sliding down to the cold stone floor, his chest heaving violently. Flap Flap flew back to his shoulder, its wings cooling with a faint, exhausted hiss. Good. Good work, buddy, Rilo whispered, his voice trembling. He wiped the sweat and blood from his forehead and turned around to face the interior of the church. The air inside was freezing, smelling of ancient dust and decay. The pews were covered in a thick, black mold that seemed to pulse in perfect, terrifying time with his own racing heartbeat. He was safe from the street, but the heavy silence inside the cathedral felt much, much worse. Chapter 5: Shadows over Nobis. The heavy metallic scent of stagnant rain and ozone hung thick in the air as Lisa pressed her back against the crumbling remains of a concrete pillar. Her breath was shallow, completely silent. In the ruined streets of Nobis, sound was an invitation to die, a lesson reinforced by the burning, twisted metal sitting just 50 yards away. Her air scooter had suffered a catastrophic engine failure mid-flight, sending her skipping across the asphalt before crashing hard into a collapsed storefront. The violent explosion and screech of tearing metal had shattered the city's dead silence, immediately drawing the attention of every horror in the sector. She had barely managed to drag herself into the shadows before the area was completely overrun. Peering around the jagged edge of the masonry, she locked her gaze on the desolate plaza ahead. The crash had done its job too well. The surrounding nightmares were awake, alert and tracking the noise. It was time to suit up, and she had to do it before they sniffed out her hiding spot. She reached down to her wrist gauntlet, her fingers dancing across the interface sequence with practiced, delicate taps. Rather than letting the system roar to life, she engaged the muffled boot protocol to suppress the armor's deployment audio. With a faint, subsonic hum that was entirely swallowed by the ambient wind, the advanced armor came to life. Microlayered carbon fiber plating expanded from the core housing, snaking across her torso and limbs with precise, fluid clicks that sounded no louder than a pen tapping a desk. The suit pressurized, molding perfectly to her frame to grant maximum mobility without sacrificing defense. The active camouflage mesh rippled once, shifting from an iridescent shimmer to a matte, light-absorbing black that practically melted into the surrounding gloom. Finally, the visor slid down over her eyes, booting up a sharp, blue-tinted heads-up display (HUD). It immediately began scanning the environment for heat signatures, patrol routes, and structural anomalies, keeping her completely invisible to the naked eye. Lisa rolled her shoulders, testing the fit. The Series 7 Shinobi Rin suit felt like a second skin, silent, lethal, and perfectly integrated into the dark. Activating the visor's long-range optics, she focused past the wreckage toward the looming silhouette of the cathedral across the plaza. Her HUD pinged, highlighting two figures standing near the perimeter. They were acolytes. Even from a distance, their unnatural, deliberate movements sent a chill through the air. They stood rigid, shrouded in tattered, dark vestments that seemed to swallow the ambient light. Lisa tuned her directional audio sensors, filtering out the howling wind until a sharp burst of intercepted audio cracked through her private comms channel. The words were fractured, but the message was instantly clear. The gecko made it to the cathedral. Rilo. He had breached the perimeter, but he was completely exposed. Before Lisa could slip forward, the two acolytes turned in unison toward the cathedral gates, alerted by the lingering echoes of her air scooter crash. One of them raised a pale, multi-jointed hand, gesturing toward the shadows beneath the cracked foundations. From the dark recesses, the ground seemed to boil. The acolytes were summoning nightmares, vile, low-slung crawlers that moved with a sickening, spasmodic speed. A horror of twitching limbs, pale flesh, and needle-like teeth spilled into the light, clicking and hissing as they scrambled over the debris. Driven by the telepathic command of the acolytes, this pack of little creatures was ordered to flood the cathedral's lower levels and intercept Rilo before he could secure the interior. "Not on my watch," Lisa whispered, the suit's internal dampeners keeping the sound entirely within her helmet. She had to beat that horde to the threshold. Slipping away from the pillar, her matte black silhouette drifted across the plaza like a ghost, completely bypassing the acolyte's line of sight. Utilizing the maximum output of her suit's kinetic thrusters in short, muffled bursts, she became a streak of invisible gravity, darting from the shadow of a rusted vehicle chassis straight toward the architecture of an abandoned building. She used the structure to gain the high ground, moving up a shattered staircase without making a single floorboard creak. From a second-story window, she looked down and saw a stray crawler splitting from the pack, sniffing the air as if sensing a disruption from the crash site. It began to crawl up the outer wall, directly toward her vantage point. Lisa didn't draw a loud sidearm. Instead, she waited in absolute stillness, blending perfectly with the shadows of the window frame. The moment the creature's pale, twitching head cleared the ledge, she moved with blinding speed. Her gloved hand shot out, clamping its jaws shut to stifle any hiss, while her other hand drove a localized, high-frequency vibroblade into its neural stem. The creature went limp instantly. She caught its weight, lowering the body silently to the floorboards. Gliding back to the window, she calculated her approach. The pack of little nightmares was swarming across the plaza, but they were bottlenecked by the debris. This was her window. Pushing off the ledge, she leaped across the massive gap between buildings, her active camo mesh flickering like a passing shadow against the bleak, overcast sky. She hit the cathedral's upper balcony in a perfectly absorbed roll and slipped through a shattered stained glass window, crossing the threshold into the grand structure just seconds before the first wave of the horde reached the lower grates. The nightmares were descending upon Rilo's position from the outside, but Lisa was already inside, dropping into the dark right ahead of them. Chapter 6: The East Wing Revised. The heavy oak doors of the cathedral's east wing groaned as Brady leaned his massive weight against them, forcing the rusted iron bolt into its housing. The sound echoed through the vaulted ceiling, a lonely hollow thud that seemed to be swallowed instantly by the oppressive silence of the stone hall. Brady didn't move for a long minute. He stood with his forehead pressed against the cold wood, his breath coming in ragged, whistling heaves. Every inch of his giant tortoise shell felt like it had been hit by a freight train. The hairline fracture near his shoulder throbbed in time with his heartbeat, a white-hot needle of pain that radiated down his thick, scaled arm. The altar of necessity. He limped toward a small side chapel. The air here was different, colder, but somehow less acidic than the tainted streets of Nyx. Brady dropped his heavy steel baseball bat onto a stone bench with a resonant clang. He stripped off his ruined coat, revealing the dark green, scarred surface of his carapace. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out water and a bottle of bitter medicinal wine to wash the demon's black bile from his scales. As his pulse slowed, his dark eyes drifted to the walls. This wasn't a standard place of worship. The architecture was too sharp, the proportions too vast. He moved toward a series of high stone carrels lined with crumbling parchment and heavy, leather-bound cylinders. These weren't modern records. They were archaic scrolls from the forgotten era of Bert Uma. The Great Star War. Brady pulled a thick, dust-caked scroll from its rack. As he unrolled it, his flashlight flickered and died, but the darkness was immediately pushed back. The parchment itself began to glow with a blinding, bioluminescent hue. The images didn't just depict history. They violently expanded his mind, forcing an immense, forgotten truth into his consciousness with the weight of a physical blow. The scrolls revealed a time when the sky was ablaze. But the stars had not always been mere celestial bodies. Before their ascension to the night sky, they had been the souls of a primordial epoch. Warrior mages, sovereign kings, silver-tongued bards, and grand paladins. They had ascended to become the luminaries of the heavens, watching over the world, until the heavens shattered. The scrolls showed the stars going to war in a celestial conflict so violent that the fabric of space could not sustain it. One by one, the luminaries collapsed, bursting into a rain of cosmic fire and shattered souls that plummeted down upon the wild, untamed world of Bert Uma. The birth of the Espers. As the glittering stardust blanketed the land, it did not burn the primitive animals and beasts it touched, it transformed them. The creatures of Bert Uma absorbed the astral ash, and the impact forced a beautiful, brutal evolution. The animals twisted into humanoid forms, but they inherited far more than bipedal stature. The souls housed within the shattered stars took root in their new hosts. The essence of what those stars had been before they ascended was reborn in the flesh of beasts. Brady gripped the edges of the corral, his mind reeling under the immensity of the knowledge. He traced an ancient, shifting illustration of the first espers emerging from the dust. Creatures infused with the dust of warrior mages crackled with the blue fire of collapsed nebulae. Those who inherited the souls of ancient kings rose with absolute, commanding authority over the elements. Others became bards, their voices carrying the harmonic frequencies of the cosmos, or shadow assassins formed from the cold vacuum of the space between stars. They were not just humanoid animals. They were the reincarnated might of the heavens. The sealing of the dark. The Great Star War had been fought against a creeping, absolute darkness and its endless legions of ancients. When the cosmic dust settled, the newly formed espers, wielding the magic and martial prowess of their celestial ancestors, became the ultimate shield of Bert Uma. In a cataclysmic final battle, the Star Kings and their armies drove the primordial horrors into the deepest depths of the world, sealing them beneath the crust using the last of their concentrated star essence to lock the gates. That's why, Brady whispered, his deep voice rattling the quiet stone chamber. The sky above Nyx was a hollow, black void because the stars were no longer up there. They were down here. They had sacrificed their place in the heavens to become the very people walking the streets of Nyx today. Every Nyxian carried a fragment of a dead star in their blood. The awakening. The scrolls began to vibrate violently beneath Brady's heavy claws. The bioluminescent ink turned a deep, bleeding red. The revelation clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The demonic presence he had been fighting wasn't just a random occurrence. The darkness was concentrated in pepper seeds for a reason. It was a place where the planetary crust was thin. Whoever, or whatever, was orchestrating the chaos in the cathedral was attempting to shatter the ancient seals the original Espers had placed on the ancients. They wanted to let the darkness back out, and without the stars in the sky to stop them, there would be no one to turn the tide. No more reading, Brady grunted. He reached down and wrapped his thick, scaled fingers around the leather grip of his steel baseball bat. The cold metal suddenly felt different in his hands, warm, humming with a faint, dormant light that he now recognized as the echo of his own ancestral soul. He wasn't just a hard-boiled detective anymore. He was a descendant of the stars, a piece of the celestial army that had sealed the dark once before. He stood up to his full, imposing height, the hairline fracture in his shell forgotten in the face of a prehistoric threat. The East Wing was silent no longer. From somewhere deep within the central nave, the thunderous, echoing slam of a giant door shuddered through the cathedral's stone foundations. Fine dust rained down from the vaulted ceiling above him. Someone, or something, was moving in the darkness, and they had just closed themselves off. Brady, armed with the immense knowledge of his lineage and a slab of solid steel, was going to find out exactly what was waiting in the shadows. He turned toward the hall, his giant carapace catching the fading glow of the stardust scrolls, and began his long, heavy walk to investigate the heart of the cathedral.
Rilo and Flap Flap have reached the cathedral doors, hoping to find shelter. But in a world consumed by terror, faith cannot protect them from what waits in the dark. Is someone still alive inside the cathedral? Or has another grotesque nightmare claimed its halls? Chapter 7 arrives June 5th, 2026. Stay tuned for the next descent into terror in Nobis.
Here I am, watch me glow. I'm a star in the sky, with the fire in my soul and the will to fly high. In this cape of dream, we'll dance till we fall. We're unstoppable now, hear my anthem call. Every step I take sends sparks in the air. Dreams in my heart and a comet's flare. Shaking off shadows, I'm bold and divine. With colors exploding, it's my time to shine. Feel the heat rise and the crowd roars loud. In this vibrant storm, I stand unbound. Here I am, watch me glow. I'm a star in the sky, with the fire